I'm Ben Newman. I'm a professor of biology at Texas A&M University. I used to be at Texarkana, hence the Texarkana over here. Let's talk brachiopods. These are my favorite fossils out of all the fossils. And there are a few of them that are still alive. So the image that's right up here is a little larva of a modern brachiopod. And what you'll see is that it has two little shells. The triangular or sort of oval shape at the back, that is the body, and part of that's like a mouth and a stomach, and the other part of that are some muscles. And so the muscles will control these two shells, and they'll open and shut them. And then the other thing I'm sure you see is that sticking out, we have these tentacles. Those are called a lophophore. Lophophore. So the lophophore is it's a set of feeding tentacles that these are going to use to gather food, and they're also going to be able to whip these in a direction, kind of like a sponge does, to draw water in a particular way. And so they'll be pulling water in and then filtering out all the little particles from the water that are the right size to eat, and then they sort of move them like a conveyor belt down toward the mouth, which is in the center. It would be right back here, kind of at the back of the tentacles. And that's true of modern brachiopods and ancient ones. Now, the trick when studying these ancient ones is to see if you can picture the actual animal that used to be in there. And you have a lot of clues on the shell. You'll have all kinds of little scars from the muscles, little tracks where those feeding arms, where the lophophore used to sit. All kinds of good stuff in there, including some things that we probably don't fully understand yet, but maybe will someday. So there you go. I'll talk you through this in a couple of parts. I'm putting a little stop sign in the bottom corner every time we're going to break for a new part. So let's go. Over here, these are brachiopods, and these are some of the ones that would come from the Upper Carboniferous or Pennsylvanian of central Texas. And these are all ones that I found, and they're beautiful, aren't they? I think they're great. These brachiopods would have all lived somewhere between about 297 million years ago and about 307 million years ago, approximately. Yeah, maybe a little less than that. So let's figure out what they are and how they work. Okay. First section, basics, orientation. So, brachiopod kind of looks like a butterfly, but it's not a butterfly, and it's actually oriented differently. So this bit at the top is actually called the posterior. So this is the back end of it, and it grows by building on to the anterior. So it sort of grows forward from a starting point at the back, which is kind of how most seashells would work this way. So these, again, are a totally different kind of thing. They're not like a mollusk, like a bivalve, but they do have two valves. Yeah, they're just one of nature's other creatures that happens to need a little extra protection and figured out a way to do it. Think of a brachiopod as like a Pac-Man. So it's got a side that opens, and you can see that up here in the little brachiopod that's swimming around. And so that's going to be the front, just like it's the front of the Pac-Man, right? Yeah, makes sense. Now you got to think of this as a Pac-Man that has a tail, which is weird. A lot of these will develop a little thing that comes out of the posterior, and it's kind of like a tail. They can use it for digging or for attaching to things, and it's called the pedicle, Pedicle. So there you go. And so this is like a fleshy, muscular tube, and it's changed form a little bit. They used to excrete waste through it in some of the very, very early ones, but the ones that are proper brachiopods, it's just a muscular tail. In some brachiopods, though, this basically never develops. It stays inside the shell. But when it goes through the shell like this, you'll see an opening, and it's usually a little triangle-shaped opening, and that's where the little pedicle used to come through. So if you look and you find an oval or a triangular opening, and it'll be right up near what we call the nose of the shell, the sort of pointy bit at the posterior, then that's the pedicle opening. Isn't that cool? So here's Yeah, here's the view. And the part that opens, we can call, it's the anterior, so it's the front. You can call it the commissure. That's just a fancy word meaning the part that opens. Yeah, and lets stuff in or out. Okay, so this is an example of a modern brachiopod. This is Lingula. And here's our big, gigantic pedicle. And so these things will be in the tidal zone, and they will dig themselves down using the pedicle. So they'll hide when they need to. And then when it's time to come up and feed, they'll dig themselves back up and feed just with the pedicle. So that's kind of the most muscular, robust part of them. But if you think of them like a rabbit, people usually show them in this orientation with the nose up here and the commissure down here. It's really like showing a rabbit in this orientation. You're basically hanging it by its posterior. So it's weird, but whatever. You do you. Yeah. Now there are two valves, and they have different names. We can call them the dorsal and ventral valve, which is fine, but the older names that I still like are the pedicle valve and the brachial valve. And the pedicle valve is the one you would think, being a sensible person, that the pedicle would just come out in between the valves. And in some very, very primitive brachiopods, it does do that. But very quickly in their evolution, it shifts and the pedicle comes out of the pedicle valve. So it'll come out of this little point up here. There'll be a little hole, and that's where the pedicle used to come out of. Now the other valve is going to have imprints of those feeding arms, these little tentacled arms that you see right up here. And so that's, they're going to live there, they're going to get built up, and they're going to have rows of little spines to sort of direct the water flow so that it gets sort of stirred up a little bit and gets funneled over the feeding tentacles. And so that's the brachial. So brachial means it's got the arms in it, and we call these feeding arms, these two big arms with lots of little tentacles on them. Yeah. Now they're different from the tentacles you would find on a mollusk, because those are going to be tentacles that have a muscle inside of them, so they can be controlled, contracted. Brachiopod tentacles are like a little hollow tube that you can either squeeze full of water so it stands up, like a balloon basically, or you can deflate, pull that water out, and then it just sort of flops over. Yeah. So they do the same job. They're there to harvest food, and they're covered with little hairs that'll catch the food and move it along like a little conveyor belt to the mouth. Okay. So when you're looking at brachiopods, you can recognize the different orientations, and I've shown our little Pac-Man here in all the orientations. So when brachiopods are alive, they usually have the brachial valve with the arms on top. And the pedicle valve is usually bigger. It usually sort of cups around it, and it usually sticks out. Like in this one, see the pedicle valve has basically like an underbite. Yeah. So it's underneath, kind of like that. So this will be the pedicle valve, this will be the brachial valve. In some of these, the brachial valve is flat, completely flat, or even sort of concave. And it's still there. It's just a very, very paper-thin little animal in between those valves. So this is one of those cases. This is one of these little guys that lives a very squished lifestyle. And so there we're looking at it from the top, so we would call that the dorsal side. Here we're looking at it from the bottom, ventral side. And so ventral is supposed to mean front. So these brachiopods lived halfway buried in the mud, we think. So basically they're just face down in the mud. That's how you have to think of them. Their front side, ventral side, is the pedicle valve. Yeah. There you go from the side view. That's the front, the anterior. This is the back, the posterior, where you can see how it started off life. And then if we look at the inside, so I've cut apart my Pac-Man to reveal its brain and its upper half and lower half. There you go, and it kind of does look like a brain, maybe, I don't know. These little ridges that you see here, those are where the feeding arms used to sit. So these are called the brachial ridges, because it's the brachial valve, and it's a ridge. And it's where the lophophore sat, because the lophophores are named for the tentacles. There you go. And then inside the bottom, here we go, and there we go. There's our little beak up there, and yeah, there you can see it. There are in most brachiopods, there are little teeth that sort of keep the valves from being able to move side to side. So the teeth actually lock into sockets. And you find the teeth are these little bits that stick out just right there, these little tiny things that stick out on the pedicle valve. And they slot into sockets, which are located, they're very skinny, and I don't even know if you can see them without blowing this up. Let's see if we can blow this up. There we go. Yeah, get rid of our emojis. So the teeth would sit in the socket that's basically right there in the middle of the thing that I'm doing. Very hard to see, very small socket, really not much of a socket, but that's how they live, that's how they work. Okay, and so you can also, if you want to tell real quick which way is up on your brachiopod, remember that they're always frowning. So they live face down in the mud, always frowning. That's brachiopods, that's their deal. And so if you pick it up and it seems to be smiling like that, that just means it's upside down because it's going to frown. And what this is it's raised up in the center. It's going to pull in water over the top of this raised up bit. So that's going to be the sort of water intake pipe. And the water is going to splash down and go through the feeding tentacles. And it's going to go out the sides and out underneath. So water will come out along here and go in the center on top. There you go. All right, brachiopod orientation complete. On to the next section.